Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this third edition of the Aviation Outlook webinar. My name is Dr. Bob Thomas, and I'm the moderator and an assistant professor of aeronautical science at the Daytona Beach campus. Our series is presented by our deans of aviation across our three campuses, Deans Holt, Witcher, and Stolzer. The purpose of this series is to inform and educate you about the aviation industry that we are all a part of, especially during this unprecedented health crisis. I'd like to start tonight by sharing the outline for our hour-long webinar. Following my welcome, the president of Embry-Riddle is going to introduce our very special guest, FAA Administrator Steve Dickson. The administrator is passionate about so many things that interest us, topics such as workforce development, diversity, safety management, modernization of aviation technology, updating some of the existing rules, and many more. Embry-Riddle is appreciative of his leadership during this crisis, and we look forward to hearing from him this evening. We will then end with 15 minutes of questions from our audience. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button that you can press and submit a question for our guest. Those who submit a question will remain anonymous. We've already received dozens of questions, and we'll do our best to try to fit in as many of your questions as we can tonight. To start, I have the privilege of introducing Dr. P. Barry Butler, the president of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Welcome, Dr. Butler. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob. Welcome to everyone. This is the third Aviation Outlook webinar. And when we launched these webinars, we promised our listeners that we would bring you insights from leaders in aviation. Well, I'd say we're over-delivering on that promise tonight. We invite you into a conversation with one of the most influential leaders in global aviation, Steve Dickson, administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Our students and faculty had the pleasure of meeting Captain Dickson when he visited the Daytona Beach campus in his previous job as Delta Airlines Senior VP of Flight Operations. His responsibilities and challenges are even broader today and far more reaching. Our country is fortunate to have Captain Dickson leading the FAA at such a critical time in aviation. He's been a long-time advocate for safety and improvements to our national airspace system. He comes to these issues with a wealth of experience as an airline captain, a former Air Force fighter pilot, an active contributor to industry working groups. He graduated from the United States Air Force Academy and Georgia State University College of Law. I'm eager to hear what he has to say, so I'll yield the floor back to our moderator, Dr. Bob Thomas.
Administrator Dickson, it's very nice to speak with you tonight. I'm glad you could join us. What I want to start out with tonight was to kind of find out more about you and your background. And I know you have a diverse aviation history from military aviation to commercial aviation, and most recently, before your current position, the Senior Vice President of Flight Operations for Delta. So I thought we could start with you just sharing kind of your journey through your aviation career.
So I'm a pilot, but even though I am, I find one of the most difficult things is to talk about yourself. But in the interest of a little bit of context, I was born into a military family and moved around a lot growing up. And my father was an Air Force pilot, and actually went to 12 different schools before I went off to the Air Force Academy. Graduated from there, came back. Actually, I was part of the initial cadre of instructors at the ERAU Joint Jet Pilot Training Program at Sheppard Air Force Base in Texas. And I was a T-38 instructor, then went on to fly the F-15 for about 8.5 years, and then had a 27-year career at Delta Airlines, flying several different types of aircraft. Flew the line entirely for the first 10 years or so of my career, and then was asked to work for the chief pilot of the airline. And then after another year later, they asked me to run the pilot scheduling department, and then a succession of other opportunities after that. Continued to fly, and spent the last 12 years of my career as a Senior Vice President of Flight Operations, and then retired, and had already been asked if I was interested in the FAA at that point, and have been at the FAA almost a year now. It'll be a year actually on August 12th.
So was it hard for you to switch from being a regular day-to-day pilot to going into the more administrative roles?
Yes and no. I love to fly. I mean, it's to me, it's not like work. You know, it's a passion. I'm sure, like many of your students, and being around airplanes, there's nothing better than that. what you miss a little bit in a commercial aviation environment versus what you have in the military is being part of a team like you have in the squadron. You're generally out when you're flying the line. You're very well trained, but you don't have the same kind of connection that you do with the team. And so that's what I really liked leading flight operations. I still got to fly, still got to do what I love to do. And there's nothing like being in the operation and being with the pilots, but also to be part of something where you're trying to help the organization continue to improve. That was something that I really enjoyed as well.
Well, do you think that those variety of experiences have prepared you for the role you have now of administrator?
I'm not sure you can ever be prepared. I think in any kind, being FAA administrator is not something I ever aspired to. In fact, I don't think it's really a realistic goal. I'm the 18th in the entire history of the FAA, so I'm number 18. And so, it is, I'm very blessed and very fortunate that it worked out this way. And I think that going through some of the challenges and overcoming, various situations during my airline career, whether it was, the recovery after 9/11 or the going through bankruptcy or, tremendous fleet growth, merger, understanding the importance of, a steady hand, no matter what the challenges are ahead of you, and keeping the team together to overcome those challenges, whether you're, the captain on an airplane or, dealing with weather, or you're leading an organization through a challenging time. I think dealing with those kind of sometimes unexpected challenges, being prepared to deal with them, but also being able to be flexible enough to adapt has allowed me to be successful. And I go back to my childhood, just moving around a lot, taught me a lot about being flexible and being able to adapt to, different environments.
Well, you mentioned that you're almost a year into your role as administrator. Have you enjoyed it so far?
Well, I'm having a blast. I certainly didn't anticipate the challenges that we're currently all experiencing with, the virus, and what it's just unimaginable that the amount of success and, everything that was, continued very strong growth, and, new airplanes coming on board for the major carriers, a lot of tremendous innovation with drones, commercial space, all the other areas that the FAA is involved with, all the way till about the middle of March. And then the precipitous decline that we have seen in the air traffic system, declines in some cases of more than 95%, depending on which airport you're talking about. That was just unimaginable. But on the other hand, I have the opportunity to interact with, a great program like Embry-Riddle. I've got the chance to lead a very professional and capable team of 45,000 at the FAA, and they're very passionate about all aspects of aviation. And we're very fortunate in the U.S., I think, to have the most dynamic, the safest, the most dynamic, and the most diverse, and the most innovative aviation system anywhere in the world. And it's not even close. So, dealing with those challenges has been a lot of fun. But really, I think what really makes the technical challenges fun to deal with are the people that you get to work with.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and start talking a little bit about how the virus has impacted everything. And first, just sort of a general question, what is the FAA doing to ensure the safety of its employees and the safety of the flying public during this health emergency?
Well, it's a great question. And I kind of view what we have done in three phases. The first phase was happening back in the mid-January to about mid-February timeframe. And this is when, if you remember back, when the virus had not arrived in the US yet, at least in any significant amount. And our primary focus was acting as a facilitator as international travel restrictions were put into place. And I can talk about this for quite some period of time, but the FAA acted as a facilitator between the commercial airlines that were dealing with these restrictions on, funneling flights into 11 airports so that passengers could be medically screened, and so we could understand who was coming in and out of the country. We ended up funneling flights into 11 airports where they had the infrastructure. This is on a base prior to this of 288 last points of departure coming into the U.S. From all over the world. And so it wasn't just a matter of flights between China, where the virus was prevalent at the time, in the U.S. It was much broader than that. So that was really the first phase, was being part of that process within the U.S. government. Secondly, on March 17th, a few days after we saw the first impacts, a week or two after we saw the first impacts up in the Pacific Northwest and the Seattle area, we had the shutdown of Midway Tower. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but the FAA has tremendous contingency plans, but we had to react very quickly to be able to keep the aviation system running. I'm very proud of what we were able to do there. And we put measures in place that have really protected our workforce, both in the operational air traffic side and with the remainder of the rest of the lines of business and staff offices within the FAA. And now for the last, I would say, month or so, we've been engaged both internationally through ICAO and also within the US on establishing a series of health measures that will facilitate the things that have to happen from a public health perspective of getting the aviation system growing again. And we're starting to see the beneficial impacts of that work now.
Well, I know during a lot of the crisis, the airlines were changing their schedules and asking for permission to carry cargo and do things differently than they've ever done before. Was that a challenge to accelerate that process?
Going into this, the government, I'm not sure what you call it at Embry-Riddle, but the government calls this kind of environment teleworking. And I was very skeptical about teleworking going into this. I didn't think we could do our jobs effectively. And what I found is that, first of all, the availability of Zoom on a large scale, teleconferencing used to be something really clunky. And we had set a record during an exercise. We had demonstrated the capability to have 15,000 of our people telework at one time during an exercise prior to the virus. We are now at the point where we are every day, day in and day out, doing we've got about 27,000. So really it's everybody outside of our air traffic organization. And so our technology team and our contractors have done a tremendous job making sure that we had sufficient bandwidth and that we were able to scale. And a couple of weeks ago, I'd been telling one of my colleagues that we were doing 1,500 Zoom meetings a day in the agency. And my chief information officer corrected me and showed me the data that we're actually up over 6,000. And the number that I had been using actually came from the first week of April, because that was actually the last time I had asked the question. It had ramped up so quickly. So but how this relates to your question is that there are some things like the processing of exemptions and extensions that in some ways the focus that some within the agency have been able to put on that without the interruptions of daily work schedules and having to spend an hour in traffic and even working on the weekends, frankly, we've been able to do a tremendous amount of good for the industry because there's a whole approval process that has to run through Chief Counsel's office and get approved all the way up to frankly, up to the Office of Management and Budget, when we're processing these types of exemptions. So I'm real proud of what everybody has been able to do. Now, as a lot of businesses have found, and we see this in the government, is you start to lose structure and boundaries on your life, and it becomes kind of a Groundhog Day situation where you're up in the morning and you're cranking these things out. And so we've been able to function extremely effectively. But as we work towards whatever the new normal looks like, this type of environment will be a tool in our toolbox. But being able to see each other in person, collaborate on safety issues and operational issues will continue to be very important. But I think that we've got another capability that we can certainly bring to the fore. An evening like this would have required me to, spend a day flying down to Daytona Beach and probably stay the night in a hotel. And we're able to get together for a session in relatively short order. So it's definitely something that's I think helped us out.
Yeah, I know the FAA was really quick in granting us a lot of our waivers and deviations, allow us to teach remotely. And even with the airlines, letting them do different things. Do you see any of these allowances being more of the norm when things come back, or allowing more online type situations for training?
It's a great question. And it also came up, we had a 2-hour long general aviation safety town hall this afternoon. And, I was mentioning earlier that we had the CEO of Textron, we had Signature Aviation, AOPA, the CEO of AOPA on there. And this same question came up. And I think that it depends on what you're talking about. I think that certainly we need to be creative and think about ways to do certain tasks, and that they may actually be done more effectively, either virtually, or we can allow for some of these capabilities. But it's a matter of going back and making sure whether that temporary relief becomes permanent, or are there some things. Sometimes when you grant an exemption or an extension, you've put some sort of temporary mitigation in place to be able to enable that, and that might not be part of the enduring construct. So we would, I think, need to go back and look at this and see if it's something that we want to incorporate verbally. I think with Part 141 training programs, with respect to instruction in the physical classroom, we provided very immediate relief on that. There really is no current prohibition on delivering a course like that, provided you meet the requirements. So it's a matter of in this case, it was an exemption or a deviation that was allowed for this specific circumstance. What you would have to do is go back and say, well, this type of training is delivered equally effectively. Bring the data forward with this type of delivery method. And it's something that we would definitely look at. And we're doing the same thing with our own training programs at our academy for our controllers, and also with the airlines as well.
All right, let's. I want to talk a little bit about the Aviation Trust Fund now, which is what helps finance things like the FAA's construction and safety improvements in airports. And the CARES Act imposed a tax holiday that what really kind of funds that trust fund, and it goes through the end of this year. Do you have any concerns about any kind of loss of funding for the FAA with the tax holiday in place?
Well, absolutely. It's a big issue, and we're working very closely with the Department of Transportation and the Congress on it. And coming into COVID, actually as recently as I testified in front of the House Appropriations Committee on our budget plan back on Wednesday, March 11th. So as of that point in time, so this is pre-CARES Act, as of that point in time, the FAA was going to be completely self-sustaining, even planning for a recession, a drop in revenues of 20% on out into infinity. We had completely weaned ourselves off of the general fund. And about 97 to 98% of the aviation trust fund revenues come from airline ticket taxes of one type or another. And so the tax holiday, yes, that pretty much put that down pretty close to zero, but it really doesn't matter too much because the drop in demand was so steep that as a practical matter, those revenues had dried up to, probably less than 5% of where they would have been. And so we have a short-term problem that we need to work on between now and really this fall, where our uncommitted balance in the trust fund, which we'd come into with about a $18 billion uncommitted balance, or not uncommitted balance, but the total balance. The uncommitted balance, I believe, was in the $5 billion range. But this is what we plan on to fund our capital projects and also our operations accounts and our research and development accounts. So we've got to have a mechanism with a drop in demand, even after the tax holiday expires. We still have to, we've done some sensitivities, some financial projections on how long it's going to take for demand and revenue levels to get back to where they were projected. And we think that's going to be at least 2 to 3, 4 years. So we're going to have to work with the Congress to make sure that we fill that gap. And there are constructive discussions on doing that right now.
Well, I think a lot of people are trying to look and figure out what recovery would look like in this situation. And you have experience both from the flight side and the executive side. What do you think it's going to take for aviation to really bounce back to where it was? And what do you think that recovery will look like?
Well, first of all, it's interesting. General aviation, although there's some imbalances in different sectors, I look at the traffic numbers every day, and general aviation is actually up a little bit over the 3-year rolling average. And it was down, but it never was down nearly as much as the airlines. And so in terms of, the heaviest users of the system, which are the scheduled airlines, and no one should, this is my personal opinion. This is not an official government projection or anything anyone should buy stock on. But I think there's some pent-up demand for leisure travel. And I think, you're seeing ticket prices very depressed to try to help stimulate some of that demand. So I actually think some volume will come back to a point, but it'll be mostly leisure travel. I think that business travel is going to be slower because I think that corporate travel budgets are going to be scrutinized very closely. And, they will be learning different ways to engage customers or to get deals done. There still is not going to be any substitute for person-to-person contact ultimately, but I think it'll be some time probably before we see business travel at the rates that we had before. And remember that business travel, depending on which carrier you're talking about, can be up to 70 to 75% of an airline's revenue. So the business travel, the first class cabin subsidizes lower ticket prices in the coach section of the airplane. So that's going to, those revenues are probably going to depress for a while. And I think because of the trajectory of the virus around the world and some of the uncertainty, I think the last thing that will come back is international travel at any kind of large scale. It'll be on out a little bit further.
Well, as we look to the future, I know we don't want to focus on the virus too much and kind of look towards the future and other aspects of the FAA. One of the big one you've already mentioned is UAS, Unmanned Aircraft Systems. And there's already been, since the rules came out, Part 107, 135,000 remote pilot certificates issued
Right.
already. So other countries have different ways of getting those certificates. Ours is just a knowledge test. Some actually make you do some flight testing. Do you see any changes to that issuance of a certificate? Some people think it might be a hurdle. Some people think it'll help with safety. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for Part 107, we're happy with the current protocols. And, our strategy is to, unlike some other parts of the world, frankly, our strategy is to integrate UAS operations, but we will have, once we have the remote ID rule and ops over people and all that, which we should have that, we're working hard to get the remote ID rule completed before the end of this year, but that will start to enable more advanced operations and really beyond Part 107. And that's really where you would get into more formal licensing programs. But I think 107, we're actually pretty happy with things as they stand in terms of, but we will continue to evaluate it, and we'll revise, our training and testing and certification requirements, as we need to, depending on the nature of the operation.
Well, one of the other, if we look at training specifically, in the international community, evidence-based training is the term for proficiency-based training, where you have a set of minimum standards of performance and you really focus on decision-making too, instead of just hitting a number of hours to get a certificate. Do you see any options in our current training curriculums to kind of go away from here's a certain number of hours that you meet, very strict, to something more adaptive to the individual, where they still meet the requirements, but make it a little bit more flexible than a rigid training course?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think in general, the concept of evidence-based training is already used in many parts of how we train aviators. The advanced qualification programs that the airlines have are very much of that, type of philosophy. And the FAA and the Flight Standards Service are always interested in, learning about and evaluating new training techniques. We're working with the Air Force on some of the work that they're doing around pilot training. And we obviously want to make sure we have the appropriate level of safety and performance for any airman. Evidence-based training per se is, of course, a methodology that was developed to support pilot or crew member recurrent training and assessment. Competency-based training is how you'll hear it referred to a lot of times. When I was on the IATA operations committee, they would talk about evidence-based training and competency-based training sort of in the same breath sometime, but that's really a broader framework that's now being looked at as an alternative way to train pilots using a proficiency-based curriculum for meeting the requirements of the certificate. And there was an ICAO task force that recently completed work in this area for type ratings, and we anticipate additional ICAO work. As a matter of fact, we recommended at the 40th ICAO Assembly this fall a pilot training and licensing panel to look at global aviation safety standards, and ICAO just adopted that, and the FAA will be represented on that technical panel. So we're going to continue to do work, in that area.
Yeah, I think we're at a unique time with technology where we could try and maybe adapt some of what we do. And especially if you look at pilots who go to the commercial, like actually airline flying, kind of tweaking how we train them to sort of match what their future professions might be, but still maintaining the standards that we have.
Absolutely. And it's a great point. And I think I would point out, that, obviously we're going through some challenges right now, but there's going to be tremendous opportunities. And even though, there might be some near-term, we talked about capacity at the airlines and, some pull downs in different aviation sectors. It is going to bounce back fairly quickly. And I believe there's going to be a generational shift as you've got a lot of aviators and others who are probably not going to be working past this cycle. And so that's going to create an opportunity to matriculate into your career of choice. So the important thing I would say is you got to be, always be ready for the opportunities, because they're going to be there. You never quite know exactly when they're going to come up.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about pilot training now, but there's also maintenance training and air traffic control. So I'd like to ask you about maintenance first. I know the training requirements haven't been updated for aviation maintenance technicians in a number of years. And I know we even have some people at our university working and involved in the organizations on
Right.
updating that. What do you see as the path forward to bring those updated requirements into
Well,
play?
it's a great question. And first of all, Doctor, we appreciate Embry-Riddle's recommendations from the faculty members and their contributions to the rulemaking. And as you mentioned, we are in the rulemaking process to update and modernize the Part 147 regulation. These efforts include both regulatory and non-regulatory approaches, such as the alignment between the 147 curriculum requirements and the emerging Airman Certification Standards, or we know those as ACS. The regulatory revisions that are proposed in the NPRM and the supplemental NPRM include some requested updates to the curriculum and some additional flexibilities that the industry wanted. And so our appropriate offices are working diligently to get the final rule published as soon as possible. So I would just say, stay tuned. We've got a very full rulemaking docket right now. I actually, tonight when we get finished, I'm looking at my latest tranche of streamlined space launch and recovery rulemaking. And we're trying to get that out because we want to support that industry, which the FAA is very intimately involved with as well. But we'll keep that moving.
And do you see any changes on the horizon for the training of air traffic controllers? I know we have the FAA's, the CTI, the Collegiate Training Initiative here at Embry-Riddle. Do you see any other changes possibly for air traffic controller training?
Yeah, I think we do. Similar to the changes that we talked about a minute ago with 147 and even the pilot training curricula. We will continue to evolve to make our training, learner-centric with emphasis on low, medium, and high fidelity simulation, making things more realistic, introducing perturbations, into the environment, so that in this case, controllers are ready for the job. And I think the changes that we're looking at will create a greater flexibility on the part of those going through the training and allow some degree of on-demand learning and simulation. Now, currently, a lot of this still needs to be done in the lab. And, there's no way to duplicate the realism of that environment. But as we've seen with flight simulation, with introducing things like augmented reality, and some other realistic elements based on new learning technologies, it's something that we will continue to look at. One of the challenges that we've got here in the U.S. obviously is other than the military, the employer, unlike doctors and lawyers and pilots and accountants, the employer is the Federal Aviation Administration for air traffic controllers. And so, the Department of Defense and the FAA are really the only two major employers. And in the interest of safety management, we've determined right now that the existing methodology is the preferred methodology for training. But and we see that around the world as well. Most of the air navigation service providers have their own training pipeline. But again, it's something that we will look at very closely in the future. And our academy does a great job, and the CTI programs do a great job of producing very qualified candidates. But it's something that we'll continue to evaluate as we go forward.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of interest too with how virtual reality and augmented reality would tie in, and I know there's going to have to be a lot of research done to see how that would fit into what would count and didn't, just like when we had FTDs and those sorts
Absolutely.
of things.
Yeah.
And if we focus on safety, I know one of the things that was brought up too is that the FAA has safety management systems required for Part 121 carriers, the airlines. Do you see the safety management system structure kind of moving to other certificate holders as well?
I do. We're looking at SMS for manufacturers. We're looking at it for Part 135, we're looking at it for helicopter air tours and others. So we're looking at it for airports. And there's been a good bit of work that's been done, and we will continue to do that. And I think that properly implemented safety management systems are a real benefit in terms of identifying hazards and taking proactive actions to mitigate them, and also making sure that the whole organization has a real safety culture. You know, sometimes even when I was in the military in the early years, you know, you would have the commander of the unit, and safety was kind of looked at as the safety officer's job, who was in a, you know, a subordinate position, and the mission was always the important thing. And there needs to be a balance there. You're always going to have a tension somewhat between mission accomplishment, whether you're in the military or at an airline, or, you know, an instructor sitting with a student at the end of the runway, you know, looking at, you know, the weather, and they're going to be able to get the mission in today. You know, everybody wants to stay on track, but you've got to have that, you know, that check that, you know what, we really don't have to go today. And, you know, we want to have the information to be able to make informed decisions and manage the risk, and the organization needs to support that. And so SMS has proven to be very powerful in that respect, because it allows for safety issues to be identified and mitigated in a much more systematic way, so that the entire organization has visibility into hazards before they become, you know, big safety issues. They can actually be mitigated when you're still in a precursor state.
Well, if we continue to look to the future, maybe the next 5 years or so, I know we mentioned a few things about UAS and updating training. Is there anything else, maybe with technology or anything else that you see happening in the next 5 years in the future of the FAA that would maybe incorporate into the airspace system, or any technology on the horizon that's coming up?
Well, it's happening now. You know, this, again, despite, you know, setting the current challenges behind, which will be, you know, they will pass. This, in many ways, I think, is the most exciting period in aviation that we've had in the U.S. for sure, probably since the introduction of the jet engine, or, you know, pressurized aircraft. I mean, you have to go back pretty far to really see the kinds of things that we're seeing now. So what am I talking about? Well, you mentioned UAS, and we're really just scratching the surface on the capabilities around unmanned systems. And about 3.5 years ago, the agency changed its approach and went down a path towards of really integrating UAS fully into our aviation system. But the way those aircraft will be managed and controlled will be very different from aircraft. But those two universes have to be able to work with each other. Pilots have to know where UAS are, and UAS, unless they're going to be confined to specific areas, you know, they have to have the ability to be able to deconflict from each other and from manned aircraft. So that's really a really exciting development, and I think that that's something that we will all learn from, and that's all going to happen, I think, within the next few years. The other part I mentioned earlier is commercial space. You know, the FAA, people think about NASA and space flight, but the FAA for commercial space is responsible for the safety of the public and the safety of the airspace. So this, just as an example, we work very closely with SpaceX. We're working very closely with Boeing and United Launch Alliance. We're working with Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, a whole host. We have 12 commercial spaceports, FAA licensed commercial spaceports around the country. And, you know, last year, I think, I may have my numbers wrong a little bit, but we had 32 FAA licensed commercial space launches. all of these Starlink satellites that SpaceX is putting up, those are all FAA licensed launches. And so, unless it's a Department of Defense satellite or, some other sort of military payload or a NASA launch, everything else is FAA. So our command center in Washington, which coordinates all of our airspace activity, is involved in real time with managing space launches. So when there's a launch that goes off the Space Coast just south of the Daytona Beach campus, we have a space data integrator system in our command center that's getting live telemetry information off of the operators so that we can more surgically manage airspace closures. And we used to have to block off wide swaths of the airspace between New York and South Florida. Every time there would be a launch, off of Cape Canaveral or Kennedy Space Center. Well, now going forward, we'll have the ability with new time-based management technologies and the ability to get the data off of the space rockets or the launches and the reentries, by the way, for the recoverable boosters. We'll have that ability. And so we are in the process of enabling even more launch activity. The virus has slowed down some of that activity this year, but I think by next year, we'll be up to about one commercial space launch a week, whereas 10 years ago, we had 3 or 4 a year. So, these kind of things are happening now. And so it's a really exciting time to come into aerospace and aviation. Of course, aviation, there's a lot of new, exciting new aircraft coming on board as far as the eye can see in commercial aviation. Urban air mobility, concepts, a lot of really cool stuff going on. Electric airplanes. We're working with some manufacturers on getting electric airplanes certified. So a lot of really cool stuff happening.
Yeah, I think especially, with the new technologies and the space launches, most people just think it's one TFR over Florida and that's it, but there's a lot more to it than that. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I can see how that could be a challenge, and especially with the recoveries that never really happened before, trying to figure out how that works into the airspace system. And then of course, adding the UAS to that. So it could be a pretty complex environment in the future.
But that's what makes it fun.
Yes. And if we want, we have students and graduates, and even we've seen in middle school age students trying to shift people to get more involved in aviation and other STEM fields. Can you talk a little bit about the FAA's workforce development program and maybe give some ideas of what our graduates or students can do to sort of have a career with the FAA in the future?
Well, again, there are tremendous opportunities, both, with the FAA and with industry. And, we have a very robust, we call it our STEM AVSED program, STEM and aviation space program, where we're working with schools. We've got our Adopt a School program. I was out in my first months, I was out at the Aviation High School in Seattle. And so we're always looking for ways to engage, young people. We have one of the innovative ways virtually that we've used recently. We're wrapping up our airport design challenge, where we had K through 12 students challenged to recreate their local airports using a tool called Minecraft through a series of virtual lessons and videos over a 5-week period. We had more than 300 teams and 700 students, and this challenge was able to engage students from areas including 43 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and even Germany, the UK, and India. So, we do have a global reach. Our Career and Leadership Development Office engages a diverse pool of potential employees through our extensive outreach efforts. Our intern program, we have our largest intern cohort ever for our summer intern program. It's virtual this year, but it's up, I think, about 15% over last year, which was our previous record. And we've got 77 schools represented 9 graduate students, but Embry-Riddle is our largest participant with 11 interns. And I had a chance to welcome them on board about 2 weeks ago, and they'll be with us, through the month of August. And I think have a really, hopefully, I think a great experience. We're going to give them some tremendous responsibilities. My boss, Secretary Elaine Chow, the Secretary of Transportation, recently announced the appointment of 30 board members to the newly formed Women in Aviation Advisory Board. That's a federal advisory committee that's going to encourage women to access opportunities in aviation. We're getting ready to convene the first meeting next month, and the chairman of that board is the Honorable Heather Wilson, who's one of my fellow Air Force Academy alumni. She's the former Secretary of the Air Force, and is now the dean or the president out at University of Texas El Paso. So a lot of very extinguished or distinguished folks that we're involved with there. That that just scratches the surface of all the stuff that's going on. But a lot of great opportunities to get involved in aviation. A lot of exciting things going on.
That sounds good. I'd like to thank everybody who's been giving us some good questions, and I've kind of worked them into our conversation already. So thank you to everybody watching who gave us those questions. What I wanted to end with tonight is what we're calling the rapid fire section of our conversation. Sure. So we've got a few questions here. First one is, what is your favorite airplane to fly?
Well, my favorite airplane was the F-15, but a lot of that was, it was just the cream of the crop when I was flying, and it's still flying today, undefeated in air-to-air combat. So the only fighter that can claim that. But I think for big airplanes, I've got a soft spot in my heart for the Boeing 757. That was it's just a great performing airplane and extremely capable. And the 757 and 767 were real game changers. They were the first airplanes that were certified to fly transoceanic on 2 engines. And my father started out in the B-47, which had 6 engines. He flew it in the late 50s. And for years, he would say, I can't believe that you're flying across the ocean on 2 engines. But it just shows you the level of reliability, in those machines. But 757 is my choice.
Okay. Can you share with us one of your most memorable aviation experiences?
Oh, there's a lot of them. I remember my first red flag mission commander leading 75 ship formation at red flag. That was very memorable. I remember my first solo in a T-37 in the Air Force pilot training. That probably, being in an airplane, I had soloed before in light aircraft, but being in a jet, by yourself, on a hot Texas day, that was a little surreal. I remember that. My first solo cross country. Remember that too.
Do you have anybody who you'd say was a mentor during your career?
I would have to say, well, my dad certainly. I wouldn't have. I don't know. I actually did not initially intend to be a pilot. I actually had thought I would be. I was going to go to medical school. I thought I might be a flight surgeon, but I ended up, obviously pursuing being a pilot, and I'm glad that I did. Other mentors I had, former Delta CEO Richard Anderson was a big influence on me, and also General Bill Looney, retired. He was my squadron commander in Bitburg, Germany, when I was a flight commander and large force mission commander in F-15s, and he's one of the best leaders I ever worked with or worked for. And there's a lot of times when I think, what would he do, in a situation like this?
Okay. A couple other questions here for you, kind of about your role as administrator. So what's the average day like for the FAA administrator?
It's a lot different now than it had been for my first few months. But normally, you know, your things are happening during the day, and normally I've got 2 or 3 speaking engagements, or I'm traveling, meeting with stakeholders around the world, and you know, meeting with you know, my counterparts over in Europe, or you know, Singapore, or talking with you know, manufacturers or operators. So it's a pretty varied day. If I'm in Washington, though, usually there's at least 1 or 2 events that I'm at during the day. So there's very little time to actually be strategic or to get your thoughts together, even work your own email. That's usually happening, you know, before 7 o'clock in the morning, or sometimes late into the evening, because you just got constant pace of activity. Now, what I will say is the team at the FAA always makes sure that I'm very well prepared. And so there's always a tremendous amount of professional focus on making sure that I'm ready and I'm fully conversant on whatever the issues are that I'm dealing with at the time.
Now, I know that the COVID situation has changed things, but do you have any, in your first year, any experience that was unique or fun that you've gotten to do since becoming the administrator?
Well, I mean, it's all, you know, I think in general, what I would say is, I think I've always been a learner, and you would think that after 40 years in aviation that I would know a lot about the FAA, and I came in and found out how little I did know. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, like the FAA's involvement in commercial space, or UAS, or some of the cool technologies, how we're trying to synthesize and integrate data of all different types into our safety programs. So that's what I really enjoy, is just the opportunity to learn something new every day, and that's definitely true.
Does that leave you any time to actually fly yourself anymore, or is
I
flying
have,
kind of?
well, I had intended to be flying by now. Those plans were derailed. You know, I'm going to go out and fly the Boeing 737 MAX when it's ready to go here, whenever that is. But I have not had the opportunity, really due to the virus, to go down and get checked out on one of our aircraft. But that's definitely on my short list of things to do when circumstances allow.
And my last question for you for tonight. Now, if people don't know, if you get a pilot certificate, the administrator's signature is right on the front. So I wanted to know if you got a pilot certificate with your own signature on the front yet.
No, I haven't done that yet. My son has my signature on his license, but I have not gotten a new license yet. I've still got my my airline transport pilot that I had when I came into the agency.
I just thought it'd be kind of a fun, unique thing to have.
Yeah.
Something
Someday
different.
I will, I suppose. I'm not sure. I got to check the expiration date on it.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you for taking the time out to speak with us tonight, and for all the information you provided. It's been very interesting to hear your perspectives and your experience. So thank you.
No, thank you, Doctor. And thank you, Dr. Butler, as well, and the entire faculty and staff down at Embry-Riddle. And to all the students, it's a privilege to be with you. And I'm excited for you. A lot of opportunity. And, you know, just keep plugging away. You'll look back one day and wonder where the time went. But I'm really excited for all the great opportunities that you're going to have. And I would just reemphasize what I said earlier. If I can impart anything, is that just be ready for those opportunities, because you never know when they're going to be there. So again, thanks.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes our time this evening. We are recording this session, and a replay of the webinar will be posted on our Aviation Outlook website soon. We do have some more future webinars coming up. We have another one tentatively planned for July 1st. So we'd like to invite you to visit our Embry-Riddle Aviation Outlook webpage at erau.edu/aviation-outlook to look for other announcements about our upcoming speakers. So Administrator Dixon, thank you again for your time, and thanks everybody for watching. We hope you have a good night.